Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well.
That's very good to hear. Very good to hear. So, we can go ahead and start this bad boy off.
Okay.
So, you mentioned to me that generational trauma is what struck you about one of my previous episodes. And so, I'm just going to start off by asking this. What led you to do the work that you're doing now, and what made you uncover these stories that you're doing now?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me and let me introduce
Absolutely.
myself.
Sure.
My name is Jenny Chan. I'm the director of Pacific Atrocities Education. And what got me started with the work that I do is that growing up, my grandma would always tell me these stories about the Japanese invasion of Hong Kong, of occupation. And I had no idea what she was talking about. But
Mhm.
then when I was turning on TV, she would be, and every single time I watch anime, like it doesn't happen if I watch like Winnie the Pooh or whatnot, but if I watch like Japanese anime, Japanese cartoon, she gets upset. And so I always thought like something is wrong because my grandma might be thinking that. I mean, I was thinking like, wow, what's wrong with my grandma that like she gets this triggered when I turn on like Japanese anime. And what's interesting is that it wasn't until she passed away I found like these boxes of her belonging from like World War II that I realized that she actually had like to suffer a lot. And that's when I realized that like wow, even as as her granddaughter, I didn't listen to her about what she was trying to say. And so and that's what got me started to like start trying to uncover what had happened to my grandma during World War II. And I realized that like Pearl Harbor and the occupation of Hong Kong were like the same war. And what's also
Mhm.
more interesting to me with this journey is that like I discovered that millions and millions have perished during this time period in Asia. So my grandma's story is not even like per se unique, but is like it shows also a lot of resilience and also like how these people survive in this time.
You might have just mentioned it, but what exactly triggered your grandmother? Was it because of the fact that so many people had perished during that war? What actually triggered her?
I think that what actually triggered her was her wartime experience in occupied Hong Kong, because the
Mhm.
Japanese had then invaded Hong Kong, and there were a lot of people who were massacred and basically killed during this time. Even though that the death toll was only 4,000, but 4,000 people in like 2 weeks is a lot of people. Because the Battle of Hong Kong really only lasted for 2 weeks, and there were and she was telling me, I remember, her saying that like at King's Park there were like execution, people were getting beheaded. And even like for her, even though that she survived and like she was able to tough it out, she actually her family had to trade out in all of their belongings, all of their money into military yen. And military yen, by the end of the war, had cost meant nothing. Toilet paper was worth more than military yen at that point. And what's interesting is that like she obviously that those military yen obviously meant a lot to her because she just like put it in the box and hid it somewhere.
Mhm.
And also like rice rationing coupon. And she was basically like she had to there was rice rationing, and so I think that's what triggered her, like hunger that was going on for like 4 years for her, and also like just I mean her money meant nothing by the end of the war.
Yeah, that's tough. That's really, really tough. So, how did that, like, when you discovered that, how was you feeling when you seen that? What was really going through your mind when you discovered this? Did it like really take you to a whole nother level? And I know that we seen that, your work from all the stuff that you're doing. How did that really make you feel? How did that describe that?
I wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn like why is it that I didn't learn about this in college or in high school about like, we learn a lot about Hitler and we learn a lot about the Holocaust, but we
Yeah.
never really learned about what had happened to like the rest of the world. And that really got me very curious, and I started reading more books about World War II. And what I realized is that like I didn't realize that like Pearl Harbor and the rape of Nanking, if you think about it, are like the same war. It's just like years apart, but then they were fighting the same people. And what got me, and I always want to like get to the bottom of and have like answers and solutions. And so then by the end of it, I was just way more curious about what had happened to my grandma, and that's what got me started going through a rabbit hole. I'm still going down that rabbit hole today,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just uncovering a lot about what had happened. And we started, and it was very fascinating to me because I started like asking people, asking elders about what had happened to them during the war. And we started collecting like these interviews in like 2015, like 10 years
Mhm.
before a lot of people perished, I mean, died
Yeah.
from old age.
Mhm.
And I think that like, and then I was like, okay, if even my grandma had like, military yen in her possession, right? Then like
Right.
maybe a lot of other people have other things. And so then I realized, and then I realized that the biggest collection was in the United States National Archives, because the National Archives, because the United States had occupied Japan after Japan surrendered after World War II. And so that's when I started discovering like a whole lot of other things, like including like Unit 731. And I realized that the reason why we don't learn about it and we don't hear about it is because the United States government was involved in like covering up a lot of the war crimes because of political reasons.
Yep. I agree. I totally agree with you there. They do hide a lot of stuff, even that and all other kind of stuff too. So I'm not surprised that on that level that actually hit. So I'm not surprised about that. So when we say that historical or generational trauma on the global level, what does that really mean to you?
I think it means that these people, first of all, trauma, I think for this period of time are like threefold. First, they experienced it. Then afterward, they don't talk about it. It's like a taboo topic. And then, or like they get ostracized if they talk about it. And then it goes into like resilience, into like living their lives. But then like their kids never learn about, what they have gone through.
Mhm.
So like, I have a few examples that I want to
Sure.
like point out. In the okay, so in 2014, I interviewed these Chinese comfort women who were like basically sex slaves in China during World War II, and they
Mhm.
were like brutalized by Japanese soldiers. And uh, um, one of the women that I interviewed after the war, she was pregnant,
Mhm.
and she didn't really want to like let well, her mom told her to not let other people know, because if you let other people know, because it's such a taboo topic, you might get ostracized.
Yeah.
And so then she gave birth, and then they went to a cave and hid the and basically just buried the baby, and then never thought about it until like decades later. She was telling me this story, which is like, for me, like that's kind of intergenerational trauma, because her kids never knew about the story until like, she was basically at death's door. And but her kid would have never met her mom. I mean, if you think about it, her kid never met the mom that had ex before she had experienced all this. And
Mhm.
yeah. And then and another example I want to say is recently I went to Japan and interviewed this one guy whose father fought in the with the Quantum Army and during the Quantum Army time. And then after he came back from the war, he was very abusive and was an alcoholic and would just beat his mom like almost every single day. And so then when I was talking to him about this, I was like, well, so how do you feel? And then he was saying that he wants to meet the dad, the father that he had probably before his father went to war, because his then he would have known the father that was not tainted by the war. And it's interesting that he said that. He was thinking like, okay, there are a lot of like domestic abuse people and like victims, and don't they want to know how their father was like before the war like really hit them? And then he showed me this album of like how his father was like before the war, and he was telling me that like this guy looks very different than the father I remember, because the father I remembered had like was very abusive and never smiled. And look at this guy in the album, he's smiling. And so at that moment, I feel like that meant a lot in terms of like understanding that kind of PTSD and also intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, that's tough. I'm gonna get now. This is the time. I'm gonna let you have the floor on this one. You did just reach out for a couple examples of that. Give me some impactful stories that you've come across. Give me some of them.
In terms of like,
Anything that really impacted you, so to speak, in that.
oh yeah, yeah. So I think that while I was uncovering a lot of the war crimes documents, what really struck me is, and I think I mentioned this earlier about how the
Mhm.
United States really hit the the war crimes.
Yeah.
And for me, understanding that was very hard to digest because I've always, grown up. We've seen the propaganda that this is a nation of justice,
Right.
and we don't allow things to happen like that. And it's so insane to me that when I was reading like these back and forths, so Unit 731 was like a human experimentation lab that was happening in occupied China by the Japanese. And it was started with this guy named Ishishiro, and they did all kinds of crazy experimentation to like advance science. They learned how to powderize anthrax. They learned um, um, how to develop airplanes with like the amount of G-force that's correct for like human beings. They were doing vivisection, which means cutting humans alive. And um and the crazy thing is that like right after the war, because the United States really needed this kind of information, and you can
Yeah.
read that like they were going back and forth to try to see if they were going to make some kind of deal with these guys, and they did. They ended up paying these Unit 731 scientists like millions of yens, millions of dollars after the war, which was a lot of money, and basically gave them immunity. At first, Ishishiro, who started the lab, actually post-war, he knew he did something wrong, so he pretended that he was dead. And so then, but then CIA still found him, and then CIA found him, and then was able to like interrogate him for like a couple of years and to really see what he had developed. And for me, it's like really hard to swallow this kind of information because it's like, okay, it happened for like 3 years. It's not like a few weeks where they were just like, okay, yeah, you can go. And then like a lot of the scientists ended up being like super successful after the war because they had this kind of immunity, and then no one knew what they were doing, or like they became like CEO of pharmaceutical company. That also got me to like distrust a lot of what pharmaceutical companies do nowadays.
Mm,
Because it's just like, medical advancement needs a lot of things that are actually harmful to society in a way. And for me, and it's always like, okay, so what do you think that like they should have done with the information,
mm,
right?
right.
And like, okay, is it right to buy that kind of information and like that no one, I mean, that everyone just kind of get out, without facing justice in a way. And then it's like, it took 3 years and then multiple scientists from like Fort Detrick to go to like Unit 731 scientists and then like interview the scientists and then like figure out what they were doing and then made that kind of trade deal and guarantee immunity and guarantee kind of like a cover up. And I think at the same time, the Soviet Union was also doing like a trial because they had captured some of the scientists because Soviet Union also won World War II. And and then they were then saying that, oh, these are just propaganda um, trials. These are like communist propaganda trials. These are not real. That didn't happen. And for me to like understand, and we always see that a lot, like nowadays, and like
Right.
almost feel like it's gaslighting in the sense that like whatever it could be true is like, oh, that's a communist propaganda. But then it's like, why don't we talk about that, right? And then they're like, they just dismiss it as communist propaganda. And so it's just it's very conflicting to understand this kind of story and trying to understand the reality is not as is not like what we're taught about like morals or like integrity or like justice in how we learn about that.
Thank you for sharing that. That's serious. Thank you for sharing that. That's very serious. Because you talk about what's striking you the most, what struck you the most was like how the United States is like covering up these crimes and stuff like that. And it begs to ask, like, how does that make you feel? Where in your mind is like, why would they do this? Why would they do that?
Right. And the thing is that their justification is that they can advance science, right?
Hmm.
But then, I mean, so that they pay them. I mean, I guess in that sense, it's better than since U.S. were already occupying Japan. I guess in that sense, it's better than confiscating and then throwing them in jail and whatnot. At least
Right.
they were trying to do a deal. But at the same time, it doesn't sit right. I read that,
Of course.
and the scientists at the time when they were doing this kind of human experimentation in Unit 731, they were marking these other like Chinese people and Koreans and the Russians that they captured as like Maruta, which meant log, which meant that like these people are lesser than, and so that's why we can human experiment on them. And it's kind of, for me, it's also kind of sickening because, we learn in World War II class in history that like Japan was the victim because we dropped two atomic bombs. But then once I realized like the millions and millions who perished because of World War II that was started by Japan, then it gets more complicated for me. I'm like, okay, then there's just a lot more like moral like questions that I have. Um, and I think that's what we're trying to do as an organization is to present all the facts. You can't know about like you can't really learn history without all the facts. And like obviously how we learn history is not I almost feel like it's almost like a government propaganda thing.
Man, yeah. Yes. Mhm. Absolutely.
And so then, and you can't really heal, right, without
Yeah.
acknowledging history. And so then by bringing all these kind of stories into the light, we're trying to perform this kind of collective act of mental health for kind of
Mhm.
like all these countries that were involved and also for a community.
Yeah, and it's a good thing that, people can be able to keep and hide stuff, and you can be able to expose that and their behaviors because of their, let's say, for the lack of term, ignorance, so to speak, and
Yeah,
that they are just, you know, beyond their egos. It's like, okay, well, we're innocent here. We don't want nothing to do with it. So let's just go on and just try to see if we can just hide this as much as we can. And that's why it's a good thing. Like, you got documents, you
yeah,
got pretty much proof, you got pretty much everything under the sun that you could just say, hey, I'm going to build this website, or I'm going to go on different podcasts. We're going to talk about this because this is not right. And that's why it's like it's very important to highlight these, because we are in a state now that everybody want to hide something. Don't nobody want to take accountability for something. And so when you
exactly.
present that, yeah, when you present that, it's like, okay, panic arises. And so that's when you really have to face like the troubles that people are going to present this with. And that's why you right here, this is beyond great, because that needs to be exposed. Really, it does. It does.
Yeah, and just think about how media today still goes
Mm-hmm.
around and like talk about, XYZ. For example, right? They're like, oh, we need to overthrow Iranian government because of this XYZ. There's not democratically elected, blah, blah, blah. But they did have a democratically elected government in
Mm-hmm.
1953.
Mm-hmm.
Teddy Roosevelt's grandson overthrew it. And so
Yep,
then,
there we go.
but most people don't know history. And so then they don't go back and then they just repeat like media talking points. And it's almost so sad for me to like watch that going on like on the
Yeah.
media and like watch people around me like repeating these media talking points. And in a way, it's almost like, we're being our society is being gaslit in a mass
Yes.
scale. And I'm assuming that when that's what happened post-war, because even though that like Japan was aggressive, then they were saying, oh, we have atomic bomb, and US was occupying Japan. So then we kind of forgive what they were doing like for almost 15 years in Asia. Like they had occupied Manchuria 10 years before even Pearl Harbor. And so then we kind of forgive that like, millions of people died during this
Mhm.
war. And like after the war, it's not just Unit 731 who got immunity. Like this guy who planned out like the slave labor that was happening in Manchuria as well. His name was Kishinobusuke.
Mhm.
And Eisenhower, he was like one of the top guys. He was one of the guys who even signed his name to attack Pearl Harbor.
Man.
And became Class A war criminal. And then Eisenhower said that because we now need to fight China. So then let's get this guy out of Sugamo prison and have him become prime minister of Japan. And so then he went from war criminal to like class A war criminal to like prime minister of Japan within 10 years with CIA backing, even though that they were like enemies, like, less than 10 years ago, if you think about it. And what's also interesting with like Pearl Harbor is that like Chinese people were like excluded from this country since 1882, the Chinese Exclusionary Act. But then once Pearl
Mhm.
Harbor happened, China is our best friend, is our number one ally. And so, and then like right after the war, like let's flip that. And then so then friend becomes enemy, enemy becomes friends. And then we gaslight the public. So then so like this trauma becomes even bigger.
Hmm.
than what it needed to be because we don't acknowledge what had happened.
I agree 100%. How does these historical events still affect mental health today?
Yeah, I think that for people that we were talking to about like their experience, a lot of them started raising family afterward, and their family members had no idea they were going through PTSD. They thought that it was just a part of them. And so then they get this idea that this is normal, that like, your mom or your dad would have nightmares in the middle of the night, and they grew
Hmm.
up with a version of like, and then their grandkids grew up with like a version of their grandparents that are kind of on the borderline insane, and they didn't know what PTSD was. And so then the grandparents or like the elderly never got help. They never talked about it. And so then there's also, so I feel like that's what the silent generation is about. The silence is like them coping. It's kind of like them coping about their wartime experience. But then they have it so deep that they break out and they lose it from time to time. And I think this unspoken trauma doesn't just disappear. I think it travels down through like generation as anxiety or like a sense of displacement or like a sense that their pain wasn't acknowledged. And we're hoping to help break through the cycle by providing facts that families can start this kind of conversations. And we were also doing interviews in like Central Coast. These were like Filipinos who fought during the wars,
Hmm.
and they were telling us that like, and these are like stories that they didn't even tell their their kids for the longest time, and like this is like the
Wow.
first time that their kids have heard about this story. And then I feel like that's kind of helped us start a conversation about what we're doing and also like what their grandparents were up to. Like I think in a way I wish that I had understood my grandma in a way that we can like just watch TV together and like, understand why she was so upset. And then I wish that I had the chance to do that. And so I feel like that also, pass for me, it caused this kind of regret that I was never able to do that.
Yep. I understand that 100% because there's so much you can learn from, her and how she was impacted by all of the trauma, all of the, you know, um, deaths that surrounded it. It could be a disappointing thing. So it's a good thing now that you're actually taking up on it and you're just following the path of actually just attacking this thing like head on.
No. How about you? Are your grandparents still around? You have anything that you wish you learned?
Well, I'll say this. Majority of my grandparents are no longer living. I still have one, and she's 92. And I never got to sit down and talk to her. I never got to talk to none of my grandparents about, you know, the wars. My grandfather on my dad's side was part of the war. And I'm not sure about my grandfather on my mom's side. I'm not sure if he was part of the war or not, but I know my grandfather was. And I kind of wish that I did actually got to sit down and got to know about how he fought in the war. Now I still can, so to speak. I can still about because there's a he has, children that was born around that time too. Like I think starting in the 19 late 1940s, early 1950s, somewhere around there. And yeah, they could still I could still talk to them about it. And um yeah, that is yeah, it's tough
Yeah,
just thinking about this because it's a very serious thing because it's like even if you look back then and now and they are still like suppressing this information, it could be disappointing. It's like, well, I wish I did have the opportunity to go and say, hey, what happened in this war, or what was some of the, dangerous things that you came across? What stuff that you felt like that was an injustice to, some of the wars that you was in and stuff like that. It could be disappointing to not, get involved in that. And bringing you on here just really just, sentiments all of the, you know, true facts that are actually out there that you're bringing out, not only on your websites and what you wrote me in the email. So it's like, hey, I think it's very important too. I really do.
Yeah, and then what's I think is also important and interesting is that like young people actually want to know this information.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and like last year I had like a group of high school students who reached out to me and
Mhm.
they actually won, I mean, and then they were doing like this documentary for National History Day. They said that like none of their teachers or the judges for this competition knew anything about Unit 731, and then they just kind of they were shocked and like they won first place for National History Day in New Mexico. And so I think young people are actually very curious. They want to learn
Yeah.
beyond the classroom and beyond what happened for in World War II. Like I think we live in a more globalized world now, and it's like, Europe is becoming less and less important. I hate to
You're
say
right.
it.
No, no, but it's true though. But it's true. It's
In a
absolutely true.
way, in a way, like Europe is done. Like, and so then we need to learn more of like a globalized version of history instead of just Hitler or like what had happened in Europe during World War II, because we
Hmm.
need to be more in touch. And if you think about it, the United States was way more, I mean, in terms of being involved after the war, I feel like they were way more involved in like Japan and like in Asia, and we should learn more about what had happened in the Pacific.
Yeah.
And even before the war, if you think about it too,
Yeah.
like United States was super involved in Asia and the Pacific.
Yep.
It conquered and colonized the Philippines and the Filipino. Well, at first they did the Spanish American War, and then they bought um Philippines from Spain for like $20 million, but there were ground troops of like Filipino ground troops ready to fight for their freedom. And more Filipino, I mean, America is this country for freedom,
Right.
right? We really proud ourselves of saying that. But then they would
Hmm.
not allow the Philippines to have their own freedom in the late 1800s. And so then more like Filipinos died fighting for their freedom than Americans died in D-Day. And America was very involved, heavily involved with like the Philippines and Hawaii because they wanted to go trade in China with their open door policy. And for me, I feel like America was very heavily involved in Asia, but we never learn about that. It almost feels like, I mean, did you learn about that? Like about how America was involved in Asia? It almost felt
Mm-mm.
like it's not a thing. And so I think it's time we learn more about like the true history of how America was like in the last 250 years.
Yeah, no doubt. And you talked about, I think you touched up on it, but I'm just gonna ask again, just in case I didn't. The silent trauma behind all of this, it's like, why does these like go unnoticed and why has this been unspoken for so long? Like, that's the biggest question.
Yeah, so a lot of it, some of it is political reason because the United States needed Japan to fight China, this communist power, right?
Yeah.
And also like a lot of the episodes, like they were so much mass killing that like the whole village collapsed. Like the whole
Mhm.
village is just vanished. The like the next day. And so then like you have mass graves and then they never really mark like the number of people who died in these mass graves. And that's why the numbers are really contested. It goes from 30 million to 42 million uh people who died. And then there's also like so I'll point out this example. There were like from the Arisan Maru. So it was like a hell ship where after the Americans fought in the Bataan Death March, they were rushed into the ship so that they can do slave labor across Japanese Empire. And what's interesting is that then they were struck by friendly torpedo because the ship was not marked. And then the Japanese made sure that these people died. So then they would like cut ropes and then they also
Oh,
locked the decks to ensure these people died. So there were 1,800 people on this ship. And guess how many people survived?
I'm gonna say zero.
Nine.
Oh
And
wow.
but then it's
Oh,
because but then after the war, like, I mean, but when the ship goes down, you expect like at least half people to survive. But they had like nine people who survived. And then after the war, they wanted justice. And so then they went to DC. But then they were ignored because now Japan is our friend. And also there's only nine of you who survived this, the so-called ship that went down with like almost 1,800 people. So then they didn't believe in what they had to say about the other 1,800 people. And so then, does that make sense to you? In a way, it's kind of wild. It's
you
like,
can't
okay, so many
win.
people die.
This
It's
can't
like so
win.
many. Yeah, exactly. You can't win. So many people die, but because you only have like a few people testifying about 1,800 people, then it's all automatically casted as fake news. And so then that's why it's almost like really frustrating. And also after the war, a lot of things were kind of buried or like burned. And because there were 2 weeks between surrendering and occupation. And so then some of the Japanese people who were actually in charge of like a lot of the war crimes wanted to not be on the hook. So then they ordered their underling to like burn a lot of the documents. And so whatever survived, we're just so lucky to get it from the National Archives and also from like people who survived it. And then there was also another instance. I have a lot of stories to tell. There
Mhm.
was also another instance where it's like in May of 1945, there were like a group of pilots who flew into Japan to bomb their cities.
Mhm.
And like they were captured near Kyushu. And so then, and they were like being rushed into a hospital, and then they were vivisected in front of like a college audience. That was so then like they removed their lungs to see one of the guy's lungs to see how long he can live, and like they put seawater in like some of those people and whatnot. And then later, like all these nurses and doctors who participated in this had to go through Yokohama trial, but that wasn't actually declassified until late 1980s. That wasn't declassified until like the like late 1980s. So like for like 30, 40 years, no one knew what happened to these people. And some of these like names were then put into like Hiroshima POW name files. So then they were counted as atomic death. So then no one knew what had happened until like 40 years later.
Oh my
And
goodness.
we were writing about it, and then some like grand nephew of like the guy, the pilot, was like emailing me like, "Oh, we're trying to also get an official report from the Air Force now." I'm like, "This is 2026, and you're trying to get an official report like after 80
Wow.
years?"
My
This is,
goodness.
isn't it so crazy? It just makes me wonder like how much we're not told on a regular basis. I mean, think about how we're still like we still need an official report from the Air Force from something that happened in 1945, more than 80 years ago.
This is disturbing because so much stuff, so much information that is so hidden. And it's not even, you can bury a person 6 feet under. This information is like 250 feet under. And it's distracting. Like, how does people live with themselves like this? Why? It's mind boggling.
Yeah,
It's mind boggling. Man, I
yeah,
tell you.
it's insane for me. And also like as a researcher, learning this is kind of really disturbing because I'm like, wow, maybe I always think that growing up, I always think that maybe my government has the best intent for me. But now I'm just like, wow, mass murder is nothing.
Yeah,
Even
it's hopeless
so,
at this point. It's hopeless at this point. So
yeah,
it's
don't forget to
like
pay your taxes.
that important. Yes, yes, that right there. Yes, that. So
Yeah.
it's like so it begs the difference now. It's like, how does trauma continue across generations without people realizing it?
So I think that from that like grandnephew email, he told me that like even though, this happened 81 years ago and like that one guy was like one of the three siblings and then they grew up knowing that like one third of their family is gone. So then their grandparents are just like kind of coping too. And so then, like, when one third of your family is gone, you have this, like, well, what if that one third of the family had kids too, right? Then there will be like six more people. I mean, if you think about it, there's like millions and millions of family trees that got like really destroyed at this time. And what's also crazy to me is like the wars on TV. It really disturbed me because I'm just like, wow, these are like millions and millions, I mean, thousands of family trees that are now being destroyed like just by one bomb. And it's crazy like I mean, I feel like I'm getting secondhand trauma just watching that go
Yeah.
down. And I'm getting, yeah, and I'm getting like secondhand trauma just learning that like people's family trees could have been extended, like way more extended. And they're saying that we have a population and birth issues today.
Mhm.
Right. And
Yep.
then actually I'm starting to get more confused every single time I turn on the media. It's like, oh, we have like population issues today, and then the next day, oh, Oracle is going to fire 30,000 people because of AI. And then it's
Yep.
and then it's like, oh,
Yep.
we need more people, and then the next, so it's like so confusing whatever the media is telling us. But but my point is that like people don't really know. Like they then start having this void, and then this void is kind of like normalized for them. And it's not, I feel like in humanity, this is not normal. Like we should not just pretend like, okay, one third of my family is now missing, so that's normal. And like we shouldn't pretend like that's normal.
No, no, absolutely not. You can't do that. And it's innocent people too. That's even the more headache about that. Innocent people just trying to live life. That's the hard part
Yeah,
right there. That's the hardest part.
yeah. And when I see like kids too, it's like
Yes, even more.
sad. It's like sad, like, right? Like all the rubbles that are like falling onto kids. And I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like and then we've been gaslit into thinking that this is normal, but it's it's not normal. It's not
No, it's
normal
not.
to kill.
No.
Yeah,
And they feel like it's okay. And it's like, it's never okay to, one, kill innocent people, to hide things. That's breaking trust, so to speak. It's like, well, how can we trust anymore now? Like, how do you
right.
live with yourself? It's hard. It's
Yeah,
hard.
it's really hard.
So, what do you think the roles does when awareness play into breaking these cycles?
I would say that like then we really question what we're watching in terms of when we're watching the news. Right? We
Mm,
start questioning things. I hope that more people can question things when you learn more about, true history and how there's really no set of enemies and no set of friends. It's only permanent interest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how our histories has always been. There's, like the role of Japan and China, how they, become friends, enemies, and and also I want people to second guess the media more often than they do. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really important for mental health.
Yes, I agree. 100%. You talked about all of that, and I think you mentioned it earlier too, but your work, how has that impacted you, like on a personal level within yourself mentally?
Mentally, I think it's in a way there's almost like a secondary trauma.
Yeah.
Like if I'm reading like some documents about like this justice not being like done, um then I feel like I carry that with me because now I know that like, the government is not here to protect me in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah, but in a way, I see my work almost like an archival therapy. Like by documenting
Hmm.
these truths, we can also kind of we're also kind of letting the next generation to see and acknowledge so then we can all heal. And it
Absolutely.
also turns into this darkness of to this research and for like light for families, like what I was talking about, like this guy who was trying to get an official report from the Air Force about what had happened to like his great grand uncle. It's very empowering for me in a way.
I can look at you right now and I can tell that there is a lot of pent up anger off of everything that's going on right now. Just looking at you, and I can tell that, you know, 99.9% of this stuff it has really bothered you, it's bugging you, and it's like, this is something we got to get to the bottom of. This is why I'm doing this. This is why, I'm speaking on a lot of terms of, different podcasts or I'm interviewing people. I could just tell and just look at you and see, yeah, this can really bother you. I can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I think it
yeah.
should bother normal people. I think it
Yeah,
should bother
absolutely.
people that this is happening. And this is like and in a lot of way for me like they sell this idea to go fight a war, and then when these people like were then captured into these enemies hands and these kind of brutalities happen to them, and then they hit, I mean, but then after post-war, because now our ex-enemies are now our friends, so then now we don't really do anyone justice. I mean we never really pursue justice for people who suffered under like forced labor, for example,
Hmm.
or like people who were then killed by these um, who were down with the health ship. And so I think in a way, like, then why do they need to fight for their country, so to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I meant to ask you, and I didn't get a chance to, and I forgot to ask. Did any of your family members ever fought into the war or anything like that?
Yeah, my grandpa's actually lost his brother fighting for China at the time.
Wow. Oh
Yeah.
wow. Mm, that's that's tough. That's tough. And for you
Yeah, and
to
then he had
actually,
like a huge drinking habit afterward. And like
yeah.
it's crazy. Like he would get violent because he was then an alcoholic, and it's just, I mean, but then when I realized that had happened to him, like what that guy was saying. He wished he got to see his dad before his dad went out to a war.
Hmm. And it's funny
It's just like,
because I'm sorry,
yeah.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, no, I just want to say that like what governments do to their people is just insane.
It is. No, I agree to that 100%. And I find it amazing that you talked about that. And I have had, you know, guests that come on here and they pretty much have talked, trauma. based off of rather if it was actually them fighting in the war or um, being in the Marine Corps or being in the army and stuff like that. And they have talked about how PTSD was, involved, how angry they used to be. They just had temper tantrums. They was alcoholics, and nothing is really being done to help these people that has fought in the war. They sit up here and they'll talk about, oh, hey, the government, we support all of our troops. We support all the people that fights in the war. But then when the war is over or when they actually step aside from the war, when it's time for them to get that help, silence. You don't hear a word, nothing.
Right.
And it's like, why? You know, you do
You
so
know why?
much
Political reasons.
innocently. Yes, political reasons, and it's innocently y'all taking these people and they're losing their lives off of it. And that's been the biggest, that's been my biggest problem when it comes down to everything that we talked about too. And that just adds to it. That adds to it. But what would you want people to understand about the trauma that they may not even realize?
I think to like what I was saying, to question everything. Like,
Mhm.
don't doubt your lived experience. Like, don't watch the media and be like, oh, maybe that's not, maybe that's what's happening to me. Like, no, you need to question it more and then, like, talk about your own lived experience and,
Mhm.
maybe your family's lived experience. And I think that would
Mhm.
actually open up a lot more and on how people actually face their day to day instead of going on like Xanax or like going being very dependent on medication.
Yeah. And that's the bigger problem too, getting dependent on medication. And sometimes it's not even the right type of diagnosis. And that can
A lot of
cause a
times
whole,
it's not even.
it
Yeah, and
is,
then they
yes.
they subscribe some kind of psychotic drugs and then the person gets even crazier. I mean, that's happened within like my friend circle before. I'm like, dude,
Mm.
why? And yeah, so even question your, I would say even question your health professional because
Yes.
nowadays, you never know what they're gonna subscribe to you. And so don't listen to like just media or like, if you're thinking that that person's an expert, you just listen instead of seeking like what's actually really good for you.
Yep. That's why you said it earlier. That's why it's important to like do your research, do your homework, do everything and not believe what the media says because as a time they may not be telling you, you know, 50% of what's actually true or what's actually factual, but instead they'll jump to, you know, manipulation, gaslighting, like you said. And that's very important. That's very important.
Yeah.
But I do got one last question for you. Just one last question. What would you say to people that are actually learning this? They're actually learning the whole space of these wars and hidden things. What would you say to them if you was looking them in the face right now based off of advice? What would you say to them?
I think always look deeper than what is on the surface level.
Mm,
For example, our government loves hiring people like Ken Burns, for example. I don't know if you're a fan of Ken Burns. Um, and Ken Burns' documentary will do 8 parts to gaslight you.
yeah.
Like, America obviously lost in Vietnam. But then they will hire Ken Burns and say, "Oh, this is how we could have won. Look at this, look at that." And it's like, okay, it's so crazy to me that like they would go into that instead of like just, you know, telling people that, hey, we lost in Vietnam and then this is what we learned and whatnot, right? But instead they hire like people to craft a narrative. And so I think to if people are researching like and to protect their own mental health, they should read more than one source of
Yeah.
information and then actually digest and understand what is happening and what was happening and yeah, get to the truth of that.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get with my brother on most of that stuff because he pretty much knows more than I do about that. And not because I don't want to, but because he just knows more. He does a podcast based off of, racial discrimination, the trust in the governments and stuff like that. So I would have to get with him to see if I can dig a little deeper into most of this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, you should talk to your brother about Operation Mockingbird. He would know. He would be telling you all about like Operation
I'm pretty sure he
Mockingbird.
would. He
Yeah,
would.
it's like the CIA operation that like basically because CIA was doing all kinds of crap in post-war Asia and then they didn't want people to know. And so then they just pay all the media network and so that's why it's called entertainment. It's not called it's not
Oh
news.
my goodness, man. Oh my goodness.
So yeah, thank you so much for doing podcasts. I hope
No,
CIA didn't pay you.
no, not in this case. I'm just doing it. Like I'm really just having fun doing this. Like learning different things. Like I've had so many people come on here lately, and this been the booming part of it. Just learning from you and other people that's been on that I've talked to. I've learned so much. It's been so much fun learning, and it's been good, overwhelming, very good, overwhelming. So that's why I appreciate you emailing me and wanting to come on and talk about this because this is important to talk about. It's very important.
I think so, yeah. And especially now too, like with the fog of war, like all kinds of things are happening and they are
Mm-hmm.
hiring all kinds of podcaster and influencers and like trying to craft their own narrative. So that's why I'm thinking like, people need to get to do their own research. They need to get to like, what is true, what is not true, and
Absolutely.
question the reality so their mental health doesn't get affected.
Yep. I agree. 100%. But I appreciate your time. Jenny Chan, I appreciate you. I've learned so much.
Thank you so much, Daryl, for
Thank
having me
you.
today.
Yes,
And yeah,
thank you.
connect me with your brother. I would love to talk to him too.
You know what? I'll give you the deets. I'll definitely give you some details. I'll definitely do that for you.
Awesome.
Yes,
All
definitely.
right.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so much.
much.
Have a good one.
Thank you. You too.